Welcome to the Faith and Business Podcast. I'm your host, Elle Edwards, founder of the Faith and Business Playground, here with mentoring, accountability, and this podcast to help you be youer, to help you embrace your inner weirdo so you can make Jesus CEO of your life and business. As ever, my reminder, you don't have to do this on your own. I'm giving you writing prompts, things to think about, but you haven't got to just do it in your own head and then be stuck. I would encourage you to come and join us in the playground, the Facebook group Playground. Facebook.com/groups/Youer Christian Entrepreneur. But I'll put a link to that in the show notes. In the meantime, though, we are considering the fact that, yes, letting go can be scary, but it's liberating too. So I already told you, if you've been listening along all week, I told you the story of how, as a result of my own business meeting with God last week, I felt that nudge. Well, rewind slightly. First of all, God reminded me that actually 4 weeks of content I thought I needed to record has already been done. We've already talked about that. The content for the book, once I go through and process it and think about it and write it into sentences, because although we write how we talk, it will be a bit different, obviously. But that content's already done. So after God said, well, you've got 4 weeks done, forget it. The next thing was, okay, now what? What do I do with the podcast? And that whisper I got was, stop. Or actually, more accurately, pause. Take July and August off. Now, I started this podcast almost a year ago. Last July, I started it in the summer holidays. And as I've told you before, the reason why I don't edit, other than editing out barking from the dogs or things like that, where you actually can't hear the audio, when I fall over my words or when I get myself in a little bit of a pickle, I leave that in there on purpose because I'm hoping to lead by example, to give you an actual concrete example of what it looks like to show up and just to be and to embrace each moment. So if I was to heavily edit each episode of the podcast, that would be disingenuous and it wouldn't be a true reflection of what it actually looks like to be me. So it was a conscious decision right when I started the podcast. And the very first few episodes of the podcast, I actually recorded them sitting on my freezer at the back of the house because it was the furthest away point from the rest of my household. And so I'd sit there and I'd record it on my phone. I then graduated to my phone with a lapel mic. These days I record it directly into my computer using my Yeti microphone. So if you've been listening since the beginning and you've noticed the sound quality improved, that's the reason why. However, just because a year ago I chose to do it during the school holidays to show that we can just live and embrace the mess and just be, doesn't mean that means I automatically have to carry on. And so there's a few little different sort of stories in there for you and different reminders for you. I guess the first one is you don't have to keep on doing the same thing day after day after day and week after week after week. Just because God has laid something on your heart for a time, it can just be for a season. And then you can pause, and you might pause and come back to it or pause and stop. Now, when God says to you pause, like with me now with the podcast, quite honestly, my first reaction was, oh my goodness, if I'm not going to be doing the podcast, what am I going to do? How am I going to show up? I mean, the podcast forms the basis of pretty much all my social media. I share it on Instagram stories and all over the place, not directly as it is, but it gets, it's the starting point. So I might take a soundbite from the podcast episode, for example, and turn it into a social media graphic. It really does drive much of the content I put out there and share with you. It's the repurposed and reused. So my first reaction was, well, okay, so now what I do? That's kind of scary. But then the next reminder was, yeah, it is scary, but it's liberating too. Because part of me is going, well, if I'm not doing the podcast, what's God making space for instead? And that is where the language tweak comes in, because how you feel about a situation or an event or things that are happening, how you feel about it and how you experience that happening is influenced very largely around the story that you tell yourself and the language that you use to describe that thing. And so I want to encourage you to be very aware of the language and the stories that you are using. And so this came up, I think, in the Facebook group a couple of weeks ago, actually, where one of the ladies then commented on the fact that, it was quite overwhelming. I can't remember the exact words that she uses, which is why I'm hesitating slightly, and I don't want to put words in her mouth. But it was something along the lines of it was quite overwhelming or intimidating or a lot. I can't remember the word she used. I said, well, yeah, it is. And it's challenging. And like, when we can read a challenging book, for example, and it can be challenging. It can stir something in us. But you know what else? It can actually be really exciting. And by going, and if you've ever noticed, if ever you felt a little bit anxious, feel where that sits in your body. And the next time you get excited, feel where that sits in your body. They kind of almost feel the same thing. And so one of the tweaks that you can do is if you're starting to feel yourself getting overwhelmed by all the bits that you don't know and you're feeling scared, yes, it's scary, but it's also really exciting. And allow yourself to feel it. And thanks to the way that your God made your brain and the way that our neurology works, it does feel the same, and it has that ability to tweak and change the way that you impact with that event. And so I just want to encourage you and remind you, you have more power over the way that you experience the world than you probably give yourself credit for. And that's not meant as some like ego-driven thing, like, yeah, you're the center of the world. No, you're not. Like, God is God, you are not, as I've said before. However, God made you with a brain that is incredible. And the way that you can impact your world and the difference that you can make to how you view the world just through the power of your thoughts is amazing to me. And so I want to encourage you, your writing prompt for today is really more of a starting to think type one. It's a noticing one. Start noticing the language that you use to describe the things in your day. And the stories that you tell yourself around some of this stuff. And then the follow-up question is, do you need to change that story? With this, if you need any help, that's a great opportunity to talk about that over in the Facebook group. Or if you want to go even deeper, we've got my membership community, the League of Brilliance. We have weekly mentoring calls every Friday. So if you're ready to go even deeper, I would invite you to go and find out more about that. theleagueofbrilliance.com is where you can find out more, incidentally. But start noticing, because like I said yesterday, until you actually start to think about stuff, you won't know what comes up. So my example yesterday was when I didn't get to my desk till lunchtime, and then it was then that I actually noticed all the junk, the remind, come on, push, strive, hurry, you haven't got time for this, you haven't got time just to sit around talking to God. When that was a lie, that wasn't true. And I was able in that moment to go, no, that isn't the case. But it's interesting to me that when stuff comes up, if we can notice and you get in the habit of noticing, the more you start to notice stuff, the easier it becomes to notice stuff, thanks to that wonderful reticular activating system at the back of your brain that I've talked about before. It is that built-in filter that God gave you. And so I want to encourage you to start noticing the language that you use. And then think, do you need to tweak that language? Do you need to tweak those stories? And like I say, if you want some help with that, do come on over to the Facebook group. Or if you want to talk about it, actually talk about it. That's where the League of Brilliance is wonderful for you. That's what I have for you today. Slightly shorter episode than usual. But that final reminder, start noticing the language that you use to describe stuff. And do you need to change the story? Write it down. Ponder on it, notice it, and then come and share what comes up for you. I shall be back tomorrow. In the meantime, though, thank you for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.